Hello, sorry, I've been having some technical issues tonight, so I hope this works now. So I want to pick up where we left off tonight. I'm going to 15-minute lesson, and then you'll be ready for tomorrow. So I want to have us refocus from Europe back to what's been going on in the United States. FDR in 1940 will seek his third term, breaking the two-term precedent, and is already sort of in a wily way trying to get aid to Britain, even though the neutrality legislation would actually make it fairly difficult to do so. We will also begin the first peacetime conscription in the United States. What this does is this basically requires men between the ages of 18 and 35 to register with the Army for possible induction into the armed forces should there come a need for it. Our goal was that we'd be close to 1 million men in training if, God forbid, something happened. And the idea there was that it's not to the level and extent of what you saw with preparedness under Wilson, but it is a recognition that there are a lot of forces that are out in action out there, and we're just not sure how this is all going to end up. There is also a conference called the Havana Conference that we call with basically the 20 neighbors of the United States in the Western Hemisphere, with the idea of just explaining to them that that we've done well by adhering to the Monroe Doctrine, and that if we all stick together, we're gonna be better off. And it's pledging collective security. You can directly hear that. I think it's a reminder of what happened with and how unsettled we were by what happened with the Zimmerman Note in World War I. But also, what I think is really telling is if you look at our defense spending. So if you look at defense spending, starting really here in 1940, you're going to see a distinct increase in the amount of money we're going to be putting towards the war. Now, obviously, it's not going to be what it will be in a couple of years, but you're going to see in that first year of the war, it's going to start to go up. By the time we are finished with our engagement in World War II, it's basically estimated at what I've seen about $37 billion appropriated by Congress. Now, that is all the money we spent in World War I and 5 times the cost of the New Deal. For all the people who are concerned about the amount of money we spent in the New Deal, this is 5 times the amount of money we spent in the New Deal invested in war appropriations and getting ready for World War II. And then during World War II. Election of 1940 is popular as Wilson or as FDR is. He does have a lot of people who are concerned about the breaking the precedent. So he does not carry the numbers that he carried. He's still going to win without much difficulty, but he doesn't carry an absolute majority that you saw, that mandate we saw. He was running against a guy named Wendell Willkie, who had originally been a Democrat. But what's interesting is, as a Republican, he's running as a Republican. He's a liberal. He basically agreed with FDR on a lot of the issues, but he's just inexperienced. He doesn't have a whole lot of executive experience, but was a really popular, well-spoken guy. So he gets a lot of attention. If you look here, it's that Midwest, sort of that conservative belt that you have there in the Midwest at this time. And his early vice president will be a guy named Henry Wallace, and that's FDR's vice president. At his State of the Union in 41, he will give one of the great speeches of all time, and it's been sort of commemorated by Norman Rockwell through 4 very famous posters or paintings that we now can get as posters. And it's called the 4 Freedom Speech. And he'll do this in his State of the Union. In the future days, we will seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom for every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want. The fourth is freedom from fear. And then he goes into a little bit of explanation. These are basic, this call to Americans that there is a higher order, there is a higher expectation, and that as Americans, the privilege of being Americans, we're going to be in a uniquely or in a unique situation to be able to do something about it. So here you got freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of fear, and these very famous paintings that I think will hang and dawn many homes around America. In 1941, he will basically be able to arrange what is called the Lend-Lease program. And I think the second line is important to understand why he is going to rationalize this expense and this to do that. This is an act to further promote the defense of the United States. So while we are going to be spending money on military, it's not for aggressive purposes. It's we're giving weapons to our allies or our neighbors the way we would lend them a garden hose. We have a garden hose. They need a garden hose. We're not going to make them borrow or pay to borrow our thing. They're going to borrow our garden hose and then they'll give it back when they're done. That's the example he's going to use here. And so, oh, Sarah, you just sent me a note. Okay, I'll answer your question in a minute. So the garden hose, Great Britain, $31 billion, Soviet Union, $11 billion, France, $3 billion, China. Wait, did anybody notice that Soviet Union in there? Well, that's at the end of the war of the totals. At this time, we are not in a Lend-Lease agreement with the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union is an ally of the Nazis. We will talk about how that goes later on. But right now, I want you to understand that this is what's happening. And here's just you can kind of take this, I'll blow this up a little bit. Let me bring it to the front. And then you can stop it if you want to look at this a little more closely. But here's where you've got the appropriations moving around the country. Feel free to stop that if you want to take a look at it there. And then here, you just got a graphic that shows you where the money's going. Roosevelt loves this phrase that he's going to adopt during this time, in which he will start to refer to the United States as the arsenal for democracy, an act to promote the U.S., send guns, not sons, billions, not bodies, to the victims of aggression. It's not hard to convince people that Hitler is the aggressor in this situation. Again, $50 billion of war supplies and munitions is going to go a long ways for our allies. We will basically totally make our industries available to the allies for their war needs. By March of 41, the government really isn't even pretending that there's not a good guy and a bad guy. We're pretty much in it, but we don't officially make that, clear yet. So if you look in this cartoon here, you've got sort of the bad guys down here. You've got Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo. And basically, this is American aid to Britain. And if you look, here's the crank, and you got Roosevelt turning the crank on the Lend-Lease bill. And when he pulls it up, presumably you would have them sort of washed away. And that was the idea of what Lend-Lease is all about. These are just some pictures of some of the items that you would see used in Lend-Lease. These are people going to work. Here's all the airplanes we're going to make. These are bombs that we're making. There's a tank. Here's people carrying rifles, and this is food supplies and trucks. So this is the kind of things that we're going to send, and this gives you a breakdown. Munitions, $5.2 billion, shipping and production facilities, $1.9, agricultural and industrial items. So we're going to really do our part as best we can to make sure that our allies come out on top. Now, during this whole period, by September, the Italians are getting itchy to sort of become more involved in the war itself and seeing an opportunity. As we know, they had already taken part of Somalia at this point here over in Italian East Africa. So you've got Graziani, who is the Italian commander, will basically do an attempt to gain and take over the Suez Canal. Basically, you're going to see them trying to move into this area that was previously controlled by the Brits. So this is going to lead to a campaign and a conflict between all of North Africa, with the Vichy French-controlled area here of Algeria and French West Africa. The green here is Italian-controlled. Now the blue is the British-controlled, but the canal was key. So this is going to become an area where they're going to be fighting over who's going to control this area. This is the Desert Campaign. Some of the great, for any of you interested in tank warfare, this is a really, interesting, we'll talk a little bit more about it tomorrow. But they also invade Greece with the idea that they believe they would roll over Greece very quickly by October of 1940. And in some ways, this action by the Italians is really going to hobble Hitler's long-term plans. If you'll notice here, this here, it has the invasion of Greece. So this green area here, they're going to invade from Albania, which was an ally of theirs. They're going to invade into Greece. The Albanians are going to push them back, the Greeks will push them back into Albania. Then you've got sort of this massive counteroffensive by the Greeks. So you've got sort of this back and forth taking place. And in some ways, Mussolini does this without really talking it through with his partner Hitler. He said, Hitler faces me with a fait accompli, meaning Hitler tells me to come in when things are already done. This time, Mussolini says, I am going to pay him back in his own coin. He will find out from the papers that I have occupied Greece. Well, it doesn't quite go as Mussolini wants. Mussolini gets himself into trouble here. It ends up being a real problem, and he ends up getting stuck, and the Greeks catch him off. So by March of 41, this Greco-Anglo alliance are really resisting. So to make sure that Hitler's ally doesn't collapse, Hitler is forced to send troops into Greece to try to stop the collapse of this Italian attack. Well, in doing this, you're going to have the Italians and the Nazis fighting against this triple occupation, or this group of Anglos on this side. So Greece is going to be divided, where if you look here at the map, this is how it ultimately ends up being divided. By each with their own area of occupation. Now, this is less important. You don't really need to know a lot about this, other than this is going to take a lot more time than Hitler had intended. You see, Hitler is already planning a big event for these early days of 41. He was planning to move into what we'll talk about, the Soviet Union. So he's got a lot of other things on his mind. You're going to see the Nazis are going to invade Yugoslavia. And there's sort of an interesting story here, because the king of Yugoslavia is a young man. He's a teenager. Parents left him alone. He was left under a regent. This is Prince Paul, his uncle, who had signed an alliance with the Nazis. Well, when Prince Paul signs that, this is King Peter II. King Peter II was part of the anti-Axis Serbs. He was much more closely affiliated with the United States and England. At the age of 17, he will have a coup d'etat over his uncle, the regent, and reclaim his throne. Doesn't work out well for the young man. The bombing of Belgrade, Yugoslavia is going to surrender after a few days. Partly that's why the uncle had sided with them, because he knew they were not going to be able to resist. King Peter, because of his stand against the Nazis, is going to be welcomed to the UK and will basically write out the rest of the war in the UK. But so you've got this problem here in Yugoslavia, who is going to be in charge? And this will come up after the war, when the royal family in Yugoslavia is going to be booted. So anyway, the relations between the Nazis and the Soviets, I mean, it didn't take a rocket scientist to know this was not going to go well for them. You see the relationship sour very quickly. At one point, Hitler was asked by some confidants about this relationship with the Soviets, and he talks with such disparaging terms about the Soviets, and he said, we only have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. I think this cartoon really does sort of sum it all up. They're hugging each other, and Hitler pulls out a knife and knifes him. Forgive me, comrade. It seems such a good opportunity, so much for the non-aggression pact. He said, do not answer to any provocations. Do not undertake any actions without specific orders. So this was the dividing line that we have between the Soviets here in red and between the Nazis here in black. And what takes place next was the invasion of the Soviet Union. Invasion of the Soviet Union, otherwise known as Operation Barbarossa, was one of the largest military assaults in the history of the world. There's a lot of these in World War II, these big events. This goal of the Nazis was they needed two things. They needed raw materials that they could access from these sort of resource-rich lands in the Soviet Union, primarily the Ukraine, but also down when you get towards the Caspian Sea and the oil and the gas from there. But also, they just believe the Soviets are just what they call mongrel half-wits. It was an estimate by the Nazi generals that it would take 8 weeks to control all major Nazi city or all major Soviet cities. It is the largest army ever assembled, and they will basically attack the Soviet Union. We warned them it was coming. We told them this was that, but the Soviets, again, were not our allies, but we were trying to give them a heads up so that hopefully that they would see we know that we're going to end up having to be friends with them anyway, I guess, or be allies. They're going to have 3 thrusts. It's Operation Barbarossa. One thrust is going to take the Nazi army towards Leningrad. The other thrust here through Smolensk and ultimately to Moscow. The third is to Kiev and down to this area around the Black Sea. And the method that they use is what was called a pincer move. So what they would do is, if you think of a pincer being like a crab claw, the crab claw would basically encircle and then crush its opponent. So in the picture here, you've got this idea of here comes the army. They will just kind of surround and collapse upon, and then surround and collapse upon, and that way be able to defeat anybody that they encounter. The war is brutal. This is the area of fighting. If you look at this in 1941, June through August, it was a massive arena of fighting. The Soviets use every man, woman, and child. It says when the attack on Russia starts, the whole world will hold its breath, and that could not be any more true. The Soviets were not prepared for this. The brutality that the Nazis will unleash will just cause tremendous hardship in the Soviet Union. The Soviets will adopt a scorched earth policy, which is as they retreat back towards Moscow, they will burn and destroy everything as they retreat, leaving nothing for the Nazis to use, to scavenge. And what ends up happening is that makes the Nazi supply lines, resupply lines, that much longer. The longer the lines get, the more vulnerable those Nazi supply lines become. The images on this page, if you just take a minute and look, from people being hanged to children being slaughtered, old ladies being pushed out of their homes, just bodies everywhere. And that's really what happens. So tomorrow we'll pick up, because I see we're already at 17:30, so I'm going to stop here. Actually, maybe I'll just go to 20. Now I'm a little late, so I'm just going to stop here. But we'll stop with the move towards Moscow tomorrow and the patriotic defense. Okay, thank you for your patience. Please watch this so tomorrow we can pick up here at the move towards Moscow. Okay, thank you.